Before Wichita took flight as the air capital of the world, it was blazing a trail in the auto industry. J.J. Jones was giving Henry Ford a run for his money with a big and powerful car he called the Jones 6. The brand is all but forgotten now, but Jim Grayway tracked down the only person in Wichita who still has one and actually drives it. And he learned all about this nearly forgotten piece of Wichita history.
The tank is full of gasoline, I've bought a quart of oil.
Imagine the year is 1919. If you were the one behind the wheel, you'd be the bee's knees because you'd be driving a car that was the cat's pajamas.
Johnny O'Connor bought an automobile. He took his sweetheart for a ride one Sunday.
The Jones 6 was a humdinger of an automobile back in the day. You'd see a lot of them on the streets of Wichita because this is where they were built. But now, 100 years later, there's only one still rumbling along the city streets. And it's owned by Phil Knighton.
Out here, a let's say 14 Model T Ford four-cylinder would go 35 miles an hour. But we had long, straight stretches of road, and you could go faster. So the six-cylinder car, this would go 60 miles an hour.
Powerful and comfortable for the time, the Jones 6 cars started rolling out of the factory in North Wichita in 1914. Autos were an exciting new thing, and the Jones Auto Company was the talk of the town. Makes sense if you ask history prof. Jay Price.
In the turn of the century, the automobile is sort of this miracle magic alternative. And there is a cultural shift that's taking place. And so Jones is very much tapping into this.
So the Iron Monster, cheered and jeered, loved and despised, cut a swath across rural America. And the rural America of trackless plains, impassable roads, and isolated farms was never again the same.
But this was not uncommon for cities across the country to have small upstart auto companies.
America Online introduces new version 4.0.
Similar to the dot-com boom at the end of the century, the automobile boom at the beginning of the century inspired entrepreneurs everywhere to jump on the bandwagon.
Back in 1916, cars came in every conceivable shape and size. There were 140 different U.S. manufacturers then.
By the time Jones was building cars in Wichita, the Smith Automobile Company in Topeka had already come and gone. So had the Clawfley Automobile Company in Cherry Vale and the Sellers Motor Car Company in Hutchinson.
Industries always start small and local. They start with individuals tinkering with ideas, and then they form small companies, and then those companies grow, and eventually there's a culling, and rival companies get taken out, and then the ones that remain continue to grow and expand and so forth.
Jones was by far Kansas's most successful car company, at one point operating around the clock with hundreds of workers turning out 25 cars a week.
It's just part of the Wichita story. You look at Pizza Hut, you look at various other companies, Coleman, that produced here. They just had that spirit of entrepreneurship, and Jones was right in there.
Knighton not only owns the only Jones 6 on Wichita streets, but as a young car buff in the 1960s, he wrote the definitive history of the company when he was a young college student at Wichita State.
I started doing research for my paper and found nothing. Nothing in the public library, nothing in the university's library.
But he was able to track down one of the company's last living employees. Carl Evans was in his 80s at that time, having built and raced cars back in those early days.
He said, "Come on over and I'll tell you," because I was his right-hand man through the whole project. And he told the whole Jones story.
And that was a story of high hopes. In 1914, Knighton says a Jones 6 was a bargain compared to a cheap little Ford Model T.
Basically, for $195 more, you got a car that goes 60 miles an hour, was much bigger, more powerful, more comfortable, and that was his appeal. But the guns of August changed all of that.
World War I threw a wrench into everything for companies like Jones that purchased most of their parts from other manufacturers.
The components were suddenly in demand. We were selling to the Germans, we were selling to the British, we were selling to the French and the other belligerents in World War I before we got involved. And the competition for these components for military trucks and vehicles were so similar to what was going into assembled cars like the Jones. The price tripled.
Then, to add insult to injury, a massive fire destroyed the Jones factory in 1920. Even before the embers cooled, the rebuilding effort was underway, but by the time the factory was rebuilt, the company was deep in debt and went bankrupt. After turning out 3,000 high-quality cars, the whole thing was kaput. Dr. Price says even without the fire, the Jones Company was facing a very bumpy road ahead.
I think there were a lot of factors that worked against Jones.
Price says the larger automobile makers like Ford squeezed out the small upstarts with their ability to build lots of cars more efficiently. Meanwhile, the big boys also had the resources to advertise and distribute nationwide and develop new technology as customers started demanding more. It was some 30 years after doing the research that Knighton came across a man from Texas who owned this Jones 6.
He says, "Oh, you're from Wichita," looking at my business card. "I've got a car that was built in Wichita and I'd like to get rid of it." Well, I about had a heart attack right there.
Knighton bought it, spiffed it up, and got it running. This 1919 model is one of only 8 Jones automobiles known to exist in the world. There is one that doesn't run inside the Sedgwick County Historical Museum, but this is the only Jones 6 you'll see cruising along the streets of the city where it was built 100 years ago. Nobody then could have imagined the twists and turns of the road ahead.
Make your car open, make your car clean, no matter how you are. In daylight or twilight, in starlight or skylight all on. Take a car.
Phil Knighton says he knows a man in Tennessee who owns 4 perfectly preserved Jones 6s. And that man, he says, would like to donate those cars to the city of Wichita on the condition that the city put them on permanent public display. We'll let you know what happens. In Wichita, I'm Jim Grayway for Positively Kansas.
In case you're wondering, the Jones Car Factory is located on 37th Street North, where the Coleman Company sits now. Back in the day, Clyde Cessna rented out part of the Jones factory. That's where he started building airplanes as the cars were coming off the assembly line.